I never thought I'd find love while arguing about reproductive rights. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. That autumn morning in San Antonio, I was preparing for another exhausting battle with my parents about their ridiculous marriage arrangements. "Victoria, darling, James is a perfect match." Mother's voice dripped with honey-coated manipulation. "He's a successful surgeon, and your father's practice would benefit greatly." I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, adjusting my navy blazer. At 38, I was apparently still incapable of making my own life choices. My brunette hair fell in soft waves around my face, and my blue eyes held a determination I'd inherited from my grandmother. "I have to go, Mother. I'm speaking at the Women's Health Symposium today." "Just think about it," she persisted. "The Phillips Morrison medical dynasty has such a nice ring to it." I ended the call and grabbed my presentation materials. The symposium was my escape, my chance to focus on what really mattered, my work as a midwife and women's health advocate. The conference room buzzed with energy when I arrived. During the camp, a session after my presentation about alternative birthing methods, a blonde woman in the third row stood up. Her green eyes sparkled with intelligence as she spoke. "Ms. Phillips, your approach to emotional support during labor aligns perfectly with my counseling methodology for pregnant teens." Her voice carried authority and warmth. Imogen Bell, as her name tag read, continued to challenge and build upon my points. Our back and forth became the highlight of the session, drawing appreciative murmurs from the audience. After the symposium, we found ourselves sharing a table at the venue's cafe. Imogen's presence was magnetic. She gestured expressively as she spoke about her work, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light. "The system fails these girls when they need support the most," she said, stirring her tea. "That's why I started the counseling program." "It's remarkable how similar our philosophies are," I replied, watching her hands move gracefully. "We both believe in empowering women to make informed choices about their bodies and lives." As we talked, I felt something shift inside me. Here was someone who understood my passion, who saw the world through a similar lens. When our fingers accidentally touched, reaching for the sugar, I felt a jolt of awareness I hadn't experienced in years. "Would you like to continue this discussion over dinner sometime?" Imogen asked, her green eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "I'd love to," I answered, perhaps too quickly. As we exchanged numbers, I realized I'd completely forgotten about my mother's marriage schemes. For the first time in months, I felt truly seen. Walking to my car, I couldn't stop smiling. The autumn wind whipped around me, carrying the scent of possibility. Little did I know that this chance meeting would turn my carefully ordered world upside down, challenging everything I thought I knew about love, family, and myself. A week after the symposium, Imogen and I met at a quiet bistro downtown. The setting sun painted San Antonio's skyline in shades of amber, matching the wine in our glasses. I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone else. "So your parents actually have a contract drawn up?" Imogen leaned forward, her green eyes wide with disbelief. "Complete with merger details for the medical practices." I sighed, twirling pasta around my fork. "They're treating my life like a business transaction." "That's absolutely medieval," she said, shaking her head. Her blonde hair caught the candlelight, creating a soft halo effect. "And this James character? Hasn't had a relationship last longer than his latest sports car." I took a sip of wine. "But he comes from the right family, so apparently that's all that matters." Imogen was quiet for a moment, something clearly weighing on her mind. She traced the rim of her wine glass with one finger. "Can I tell you something completely crazy? After my family drama, I doubt anything could shock me. I need to get married within the next 6 months," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "My grandmother left me her estate, but there's a clause. I have to be married by my next birthday to inherit." I nearly choked on my wine. "That's even more medieval than my situation. The estate includes the building where I run my counseling center," she continued. "Without it, dozens of girls would lose their support system. I can't let that happen." The waiter refilled our glasses, and we sat in contemplative silence. An idea began forming in my mind, absolutely insane but somehow perfect. "What if?" I started, hardly believing what I was about to suggest. "What if we solved both our problems at once?" Imogen's eyebrows rose slightly. "What do you mean?" "A marriage of convenience. You get your inheritance, I get my parents off my back." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "We could help each other." She stared at me for what felt like eternity. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. Not mockingly, but with a kind of delighted surprise. That's either the most brilliant or the most insane idea I've ever heard. Maybe both? I smiled, feeling strangely lightheaded. Think about it. We get along well, we respect each other's work, and we both need a solution. It would have to be convincing, she mused, leaning back in her chair. Our families would need to believe it's real. We could practice, I suggested. Get to know each other better, create a believable story. Dating montage? Her eyes sparkled with amusement. Exactly. Dinner dates, walks in the park, the whole romance package. As we discussed the details, I couldn't ignore the flutter in my stomach every time she smiled. This was just business, I told myself. A practical solution to our mutual problems. But when her hand briefly touched mine while reaching for the check, I felt that same electric awareness from the symposium. So, she said, as we stood outside the restaurant, the night air cool against my skin. Are we really doing this? I think we are, I replied, watching how the streetlights played across her features. Partners in crime? She held out her hand, and when I took it, something shifted in the air between us. Partners, she agreed, her grip firm and warm. Walking to my car, I tried to convince myself this was just a practical arrangement, but deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Whatever this was, it felt anything but practical. Our practice dating began the following weekend. Imogen suggested cooking dinner at her place would be more intimate than another restaurant. I arrived at her craftsman-style bungalow with a bottle of wine and butterflies in my stomach. Fair warning, she called from the kitchen as I entered. I'm much better at counseling than cooking. The sight of her in casual clothes, jeans and a soft sweater, made my breath catch. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, revealing the elegant line of her neck. I'm sure it can't be that bad, I laughed, following the smell of garlic. Need any help? You could chop these vegetables, she said, gesturing to a pile of produce. I promise not to judge your knife skills. We worked side by side in her small kitchen, falling into an easy rhythm. The domesticity of it felt surprisingly natural. When she reached past me for the salt, her arm brushing against mine, I nearly sliced my finger instead of the carrot. Careful there, she murmured, her hand steadying mine. The contact sent warmth spreading through my chest. Over dinner we crafted our love story. We should keep it close to the truth, Imogen suggested. The best lies have a foundation of honesty. So we met at the symposium, bonded over our shared passions, and fell madly in love, she finished, her green eyes twinkling. A whirlwind romance. My mother will be skeptical, I warned. She's been trying to set me up with James for years. Then we'll have to be convincing. Imogen topped off our wine glasses. Tell me everything about you, Victoria Phillips. What makes you laugh? What keeps you up at night? Hours passed as we shared stories. I told her about my grandmother, who inspired me to become a midwife. She spoke about her troubled teenage years that led her to counseling. Each revelation drew us closer, blurring the lines between practice and reality. Dance with me, she said suddenly, putting on some soft jazz. Couples dance at weddings. I took her offered hand, trying to ignore how perfectly it fit in mine. She pulled me close, one hand on my waist, and began swaying to the music. The scent of her perfume made my head spin. You're good at this, I whispered, following her lead. Years of cotillion lessons, she smiled. My mother insisted. We moved together in her living room, the music wrapping around us like silk. When she spun me out and back, I landed closer than before, our faces inches apart. Her eyes dropped to my lips for just a moment, and my heart nearly stopped. We should probably practice that too, she said softly. Kissing, I mean, for authenticity. Before I could respond, her cat jumped onto the coffee table, knocking over an empty wine glass. The spell broke as we rushed to clean up the mess, laughing nervously. Later that night, driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about that almost moment. This was supposed to be an arrangement of convenience, a business deal between friends. So why did my skin still tingle where she'd touched me? My phone buzzed with a text. Same time next week? We need all the practice we can get. I replied yes before I could overthink it. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized I was smiling like a fool. This practice dating was becoming dangerous, not because it wouldn't be convincing, but because it might be too convincing altogether. The day we announced our engagement, San Antonio's autumn heat seemed determined to match the intensity of my family's reaction. Mother nearly dropped her crystal wine glass when Imogen and I shared the news during Sunday dinner. But what about James? Mother sputtered, her perfectly manicured hand clutching her pearls. James and I were never a couple, Mother, I said firmly, feeling Imogen's reassuring presence beside me. Imogen and I are in love. Father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Victoria, this is completely unexpected. How long have you even known each other? When you know, Imogen interjected smoothly, her hand finding mine on the table. Victoria completes me in ways I never thought possible. The warmth in her voice sounded so genuine, I almost believed it myself. We'd rehearsed this moment countless times, but nothing prepared me for the reality of sitting across from my shell-shocked parents. This is absurd, Mother declared, standing abruptly. You're throwing away a perfect match with James for happiness, I finished, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. For a partner who supports my work and understands me. Imogen squeezed my hand and I squeezed back. The gesture felt like our own secret language now, developed over weeks of practice dating. Well, Father cleared his throat. I suppose we should toast to the happy couple. The tension in the room could have been cut with a scalpel. As Mother reluctantly raised her glass, I saw my younger sister Sarah hiding a smile behind her napkin. At least someone was on our side. Then came the moment we'd been dreading and anticipating. Kiss her, Sarah chirped innocently. Show us how in love you are. My heart thundered against my ribs as Imogen turned to face me. We hadn't actually practiced this part, always finding excuses to avoid it. Her green eyes met mine, asking silent permission. I nodded slightly, and then her lips were on mine. Soft, warm, tasting faintly of the wine we'd been drinking. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This wasn't supposed to feel so real. When we parted, I noticed Mother had excused herself from the table. Father was studying his plate intently, while Sarah looked absolutely delighted. I should check on her, I murmured, standing on shaky legs. I'll come with you, Imogen offered, but I shook my head. This was something I needed to handle alone. I found Mother in the kitchen, aggressively arranging flowers. How could you do this to us? She hissed. To the practice? To your future? My future is my own to choose, I replied, steadier than I felt. Imogen makes me happy. Happy? She laughed bitterly. And what about responsibility, tradition? Times change, Mother. So do people. Back in the dining room, Imogen was charming Father with stories about her counseling work. She looked up as I entered, her smile warming me from the inside out. For a moment, I forgot this was all pretense. Later that night, in my car outside Imogen's house, neither of us mentioned the kiss. But I could still feel it lingering on my lips, like a question waiting to be answered. That went better than expected, she said finally, playing with her keys. Did it? I laughed shakily. Mother might never recover. She'll come around. Imogen touched my arm gently. We're quite convincing, you know. Too convincing, I thought as I drove home. The line between acting and reality was becoming dangerously blurred. That kiss had felt anything but fake, and the way my heart raced whenever she was near couldn't be explained away as method acting. I was falling for my fake fiancé, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. The storm hit San Antonio without warning, turning my night shift at the birthing center into something out of a romance novel. Lightning illuminated the empty corridors as I checked on my patients, trying not to think about how Imogen had texted she was stopping by later. Then the emergency call came in. A scared 17-year-old, 34 weeks pregnant, having early contractions. When I rushed to the intake area, I found Imogen already there, holding the girl's hand. Jenny's one of my counseling clients, Imogen explained, her blonde hair damp from the rain. I couldn't let her come alone. Working together felt natural. While I monitored Jenny's vitals, Imogen kept her calm with gentle words and steady presence. The storm raged outside, but inside our little bubble, everything felt focused and clear. The contractions are slowing, I announced after an hour. We'll keep you overnight for observation, Jenny, but I think we've avoided premature labor. Thank goodness, Imogen sighed, squeezing Jenny's hand. You're doing great, sweetie. After settling Jenny into a room, we found ourselves trapped by the intensifying storm. The hospital had initiated weather lockdown procedures. No one in or out until it passed. "Looks like we're stuck here," I said, leading Imogen to the staff break room. "Coffee?" "Please. I've been up since 5 with a crisis case." We settled onto the worn couch, listening to rain hammer against the windows. Thunder crashed, making the lights flicker ominously. "Should we talk about that kiss?" Imogen asked suddenly, her green eyes reflecting the storm's lightning. My heart skipped. "Which one? We've had to kiss several times now, for show. You know which one." She turned to face me fully. "The first one, at your parents' house. It felt different," I finished when she trailed off. "Real." The lights flickered again, then went out completely. Emergency generators hummed to life, bathing us in soft blue light. In the strange illumination, Imogen looked otherworldly. "Victoria," she whispered, "I think I'm in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where I can't tell what's real and what's pretend anymore." Her voice trembled slightly. "The kind where I find myself thinking about you all the time." My breath caught in my throat. Before I could respond, another crash of thunder made us both jump. Imogen's hand found mine in the darkness, and this time, there was no audience to perform for. "I'm scared," she admitted. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "What wasn't?" Instead of answering, she leaned forward and kissed me. Unlike our practice kisses for show, this was soft, uncertain, real. When we parted, the storm seemed very far away. "That," she breathed. "I wasn't supposed to fall for you." The confession hung between us like lightning, charging the air with possibility. This time, I kissed her, letting all my confused feelings pour into it. Her hands tangled in my hair as she pulled me closer. We spent the night talking in that break room, sharing secrets we'd been too afraid to voice before. She told me about her fears of losing the counseling center, her loneliness before we met. I confessed my growing certainty that this fake engagement had become the most genuine thing in my life. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed. We emerged from our bubble to find San Antonio washed clean, everything familiar yet somehow different. "What happens now?" Imogen asked as we watched the sunrise from the hospital windows. "I don't know," I admitted, taking her hand. "But I don't want to pretend anymore." She smiled, squeezing my fingers. "Neither do I." Walking to our cars, we were different people than we'd been the night before. The storm had washed away our careful pretenses, leaving something raw and real in their place, something that scared and thrilled me in equal measure. The morning after the storm, I was floating on air during my rounds at the birthing center. Everything felt different, brighter, more alive. Then my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood run cold. "We need to talk, David." My ex-boyfriend. The man who'd broken my heart 3 years ago when he left San Antonio for a prestigious surgical residency in Boston. The last person I needed complicating my already complex life. I found him waiting in the hospital cafe, looking exactly as I remembered. "Hello, Victoria. Heard you're engaged." Interesting timing. "What do you want, David?" I kept my voice steady, though my hands shook slightly. "Your mother called me," he said, stirring his coffee. "She's worried about you. This sudden engagement seems convenient." My stomach dropped. "My relationship with Imogen is none of your business." "Really?" He leaned forward. "Because I did some digging, found out about her inheritance clause. Quite a coincidence, don't you think?" Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Everything all right here?" Imogen stood beside our table, her presence both comforting and commanding. She placed a protective hand on my shoulder, and I felt strength flow through the contact. "David was just leaving," I said firmly. "Actually, I was explaining how I know about your little arrangement." His smile turned cruel. "Wonder what the hospital board would think about one of their midwives engaging in marriage fraud?" Imogen's hand tightened on my shoulder. "That's quite an accusation, David, especially from someone who abandoned Victoria for his career." "I'm trying to protect her," he insisted. "This scheme could ruin both your careers." "You don't know anything about us." Imogen's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "And if you threaten Victoria again, you'll regret it." David stood, adjusting his expensive suit. "Think about what you're risking, Victoria. Is it worth it?" After he left, I collapsed into Imogen's arms, breathing in her familiar scent. "He's right. We could lose everything." "Look at me," she said, tilting my chin up. What we have isn't fake anymore. It hasn't been for a while. We ended up at her house, emotions raw and exposed. The evening light painted her living room gold as we faced each other on her couch. "I don't care about the inheritance," she whispered, taking my hands. "I care about you. But your counseling center. We'll figure something out." Her green eyes held mine. "I'm not letting him or anyone else tear us apart." What happened next felt inevitable, like gravity or the tide. Our lips met in a kiss that held nothing back, no pretense or performance. Just us, finally honest with ourselves and each other. That night, we made love for the first time. Moonlight spilled through her bedroom window, turning her blonde hair silver as she moved above me. Every touch, every kiss felt like coming home to a place I'd been searching for my whole life. "I love you," she breathed against my skin. "That was never part of the plan." "I love you too," I replied, holding her close. Maybe that was the plan all along. Later, tangled in her sheets, we talked about everything: our fears, our hopes, our future. The inheritance and my family's expectations seemed less important now, overshadowed by what we'd found together. "David can tell whoever he wants," I decided, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm done hiding." She propped herself up on an elbow, studying my face. "Are you sure? It could get messy." "I've never been more sure of anything." I pulled her down for another kiss. "You're worth any mess." Outside, the city hummed with nightlife, but in Imogen's bedroom, we'd created our own world. A world where threats and expectations couldn't touch us, where love was the only truth that mattered. Morning would bring new challenges, but for now, we had the quiet understanding between two hearts that had found their way home through an unexpected detour. The truth has a way of emerging at the most inconvenient moments. For us, it happened during a charity gala at the San Antonio Medical Center. Mother had insisted we attend, probably hoping to parade us in front of her social circle. I was actually enjoying myself, watching Imogen charm the hospital board members in her emerald evening gown. Then I saw David approaching my parents, his expression set with purpose. "No, no, no," I muttered, moving to intercept him. But I was too late. "Mrs. Phillips," I heard him say, "there's something you should know about Victoria's engagement." The next few minutes unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. David's revelations, Mother's gasps of horror, Father's face turning that dangerous shade of red again. Imogen appeared at my side, her hand finding mine as we faced the storm together. "Is it true?" Mother demanded, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "This whole thing is a sham?" "The arrangement may have started that way," Imogen spoke up, her voice steady. "But what we have now is real." "Real?" Mother laughed bitterly. "You've made a mockery of marriage, of our family name." Father stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Victoria, you will end this charade immediately." "Or what?" I challenged, drawing strength from Imogen's presence. "Or you can forget about your position at the birthing center. The board serves at my pleasure, remember?" The threat hung in the air like poison. I felt Imogen tense beside me, knowing how much my work meant to me. "You can't do this," I whispered. "Watch me," Father replied. "Choose wisely, daughter." We left the gala in a daze, driving through San Antonio's neon-lit streets in silence. At Imogen's house, more bad news waited in her mailbox, a letter from her family's lawyer. "They're contesting the inheritance," she said, her voice hollow, "claiming our relationship invalidates the marriage clause." I watched her sink onto her couch, the emerald dress pooling around her like spilled wine. We knew this might happen. But not like this. She looked up at me, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I can't let you lose your career, Victoria. Not for me." "Don't you dare," I knelt before her, taking her hands. "We'll figure something out." "How?" "Your father controls the medical board. My family's lawyers are circling like sharks. Then we'll start over. Open our own practice." "With what money?" She pulled away, pacing the room. "Without the inheritance, I can barely keep the counseling center running." The weight of reality pressed down on us. Our carefully constructed world was crumbling, and for the first time, I wasn't sure love would be enough to save it. "Maybe," Imogen's voice cracked. "Maybe we should take a step back, give ourselves time to think." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "We're not letting them win. It's not about winning anymore." She touched my cheek gently. "It's about survival." I caught her hand, pressing it to my heart. This is survival, you and me, everything else is just details. She collapsed into my arms then, both of us holding on like we could keep our world from falling apart through sheer force of will. We spent the night talking, crying, planning, and loving, refusing to let go of what we'd found. Morning found us exhausted but resolved. The path ahead looked impossible, but we'd face it together. As I watched the sunrise paint Imogen's profile in gold, I made a silent promise: no matter what my parents or society threw at us, this love was worth fighting for. Ready to face the world? I asked as we prepared to leave for work. She straightened my collar, a gesture so domestic it made my heart ache. With you, always. We stepped out into the morning light, knowing our battles were just beginning. But sometimes the hardest fights are the ones most worth winning. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its London postmark making my heart sink. Imogen had been quiet about the international job offer, but I'd seen her researching UK medical licensing requirements late at night. It's a director position, she explained over coffee in her kitchen. Full funding, complete autonomy. I could help girls across Europe. I traced the rim of my mug, trying to find the right words. When would you leave? 3 months. She reached for my hand across the table. Come with me. The offer hung in the air between us. After Father's ultimatum, I'd been working reduced hours at the birthing center, my cases mysteriously reassigned to other midwives. I can't abandon my patients, I whispered, though my resolve felt weaker than ever. Your father's already pushing you out, she countered gently. London could be our fresh start. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Mother's name flashed on the screen, along with a text that made my blood run cold. James is back in town, coming for dinner tonight, no excuses. Imogen read the message over my shoulder, her hand tightening on mine. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. I stood, gathering my things. I need to end this properly. The Phillips family dinner that evening felt like a carefully orchestrated trap. James sat across from me, looking exactly as I remembered, handsome, privileged, and completely wrong for me. Victoria, he smiled, all perfect teeth and practiced charm. You're even more beautiful than I remembered. Mother beamed. Father nodded approvingly. The weight of their expectations pressed down like a physical force. James has taken over his father's practice, Mother gushed. The merger possibilities are still excellent. I thought of Imogen in her tiny counseling center, fighting for every client, every dollar. The contrast couldn't have been starker. I'm in love with someone else, I announced, cutting through Mother's chatter. That arrangement? Father's voice dripped with disdain. It's time to be serious, Victoria. I am serious. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood. Imogen is my future. If you can't accept that, you'll lose me completely. I drove straight to Imogen's house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. She opened the door in her pajamas, one look at my face telling her everything. I choose you, I said before she could speak. London, San Antonio, anywhere, just you. She pulled me inside, holding me as the tears finally came. Are you sure? Your family isn't worth losing this. I touched her cheek, memorizing every detail of her face in the soft lamplight. But I need to know. Do you really want London, or are you running away? She was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes searching mine. Both, maybe. The opportunity is incredible, but I'm scared of losing you. Her voice cracked slightly, of asking too much. I kissed her then, pouring everything I couldn't say into it. When we parted, the answer felt crystal clear. You're not asking anything I'm not willing to give. I pressed my forehead to hers. But before we decide about London, I need you to know something. What? Whatever we choose, it has to be because it's right for us. Not because we're running from something. She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Stay tonight? We lay in her bed, planning and dreaming until dawn painted the sky pink. London hung between us like a possibility rather than an escape route now. 3 months, she murmured as we drifted off. We have time to figure it out. Together, I agreed, pulling her closer. The future stretched out before us, full of uncertainty but also hope. Whatever path we chose, we'd walk it side by side. Sometimes the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong, but between two different kinds of right. The day I resigned from my family's medical practice, San Antonio's heat was oppressive enough to match the tension in Father's office. I placed my letter on his mahogany desk, my hand steady despite my racing heart. "So, this is your final decision?" He didn't look up from his computer. "Yes." I stood straighter, channeling Imogen's quiet strength. "I'm starting my own practice." That got his attention. "With what resources?" "I've sold my condo." The words came easier than expected. "And my car. The new practice will be smaller, but it's mine." He finally met my eyes, something unreadable crossing his face. "You're throwing away generations of legacy for her." "No, Father. I'm building something new. Something honest." Leaving the office felt like shedding a heavy coat I'd worn too long. In the parking lot, Imogen waited in her sensible sedan, my luxury car already sold to fund our future. "How did it go?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "About as well as expected." I reached for her hand. "But I'm free." We drove to the small medical office we'd leased on the outskirts of town. It needed work. The paint was peeling, the equipment outdated, but it was ours. "Victoria?" A familiar voice called as we unloaded boxes. My sister Sarah stood on the sidewalk, looking uncertain. "Sarah? What are you doing here?" She stepped forward, fidgeting with her purse strap. "I want to help. I've been thinking. I'm finishing my nursing degree next month." "You want to work with us?" Imogen asked, surprise coloring her voice. "Yes." Sarah lifted her chin defiantly. "What Mother and Father did wasn't right, and I've seen how happy you two make each other." Tears pricked my eyes as I hugged my sister. Having one ally in my family meant more than I could express. The next weeks passed in a blur of renovation and preparation. We worked ourselves to exhaustion, transforming the shabby office into a welcoming space. Imogen's counseling clients followed her, spreading word about our integrated approach to women's health. "Look what came today," Imogen called one evening, waving an envelope. Her family's lawyer had found a loophole in the inheritance clause. "Good news?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "They're willing to negotiate, if we prove our relationship is genuine." "Then we'll prove it." I took her hands in mine. "We've got nothing to hide anymore." That night, as we lay in bed surrounded by business plans and budget spreadsheets, Imogen traced patterns on my arm. "Are you sure about all this? We could still consider London." "I'm sure." I turned to face her. "This is where we're needed, where we can make a real difference. Even if it means struggling?" "Even then." I kissed her softly. "Besides, we're not struggling, we're building." A knock at our door the next morning revealed Sarah, armed with coffee and determination. I brought reinforcements. Behind her stood 3 nurses from Father's practice, women I'd worked with for years. "We want to join your team," they announced. "But your jobs," I started, "are less important than doing what's right," the senior nurse finished. "We believe in your vision, Victoria, both of you." Imogen squeezed my hand as we welcomed our growing team. This was more than we'd dared hope for, not just survival but the chance to create something meaningful. Later, reviewing applications from patients, Imogen looked up suddenly. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" "We really are." I smiled, watching her blonde hair catch the evening light. "Scared?" "Terrified." She laughed. "But in a good way." We'd lost things, family approval, financial security, comfortable certainty, but what we'd gained felt infinitely more valuable: purpose, authenticity, and a love that grew stronger with every challenge. Sarah's support had shown us that sometimes family can surprise you. The nurse's loyalty proved that doing the right thing attracts the right people. And every day, as we built our practice together, we discovered new strengths we never knew we had. 3 months into running our clinic, I was reviewing patient files when Sarah burst into my office, practically vibrating with excitement. "You need to come home," she announced. "Mother's asking for you." I exchanged a worried glance with Imogen, who'd appeared in the doorway. "Sarah, I don't think." "Trust me," my sister insisted. "Something's different." The drive to my parents' house felt surreal. Imogen squeezed my hand as we pulled into the familiar driveway, her presence anchoring me. Mother was waiting in the garden, looking smaller somehow. Her perfectly manicured hands twisted in her lap as we approached. "Victoria," she said softly, "and Imogen, please sit." We settled onto the patio furniture, the afternoon sun warming the awkward silence. Then Mother did something I'd never seen before. She started to cry. "I saw your clinic yesterday," she admitted, dabbing at her eyes. "I didn't mean to, but one of my friends, her daughter is a patient of yours." I held my breath, waiting for the criticism. "She told me how you helped her daughter through a difficult pregnancy, how you both did." Mother looked directly at Imogen for the first time. "She said you saved her daughter's life." "We were just doing our jobs," Imogen replied gently. "No." Mother shook her head. "You're doing more than that. You're changing lives, and I was wrong." The words hung in the air like delicate crystal, precious and fragile. "I've been watching you," she continued. "Through Sarah's updates, the way you've built something from nothing, the way you support each other." She reached for my hand, then Imogen's, creating a circle of tentative connection. "I miss my daughter," she whispered, "and I'd like to know my daughter-in-law if you'll let me." Later that evening, as we processed the unexpected turn of events, another surprise arrived. Imogen's family lawyer appeared at our door with news. "The inheritance clause," he explained, spreading documents across our kitchen table. "It specified marriage but not gender. Your grandmother was more progressive than anyone realized." "What are you saying?" Imogen asked, gripping my hand. "I'm saying the estate is yours, all of it. Your grandmother's personal letters made it clear. She wanted you to find genuine love, regardless of convention." We celebrated that night with Sarah and our clinic staff, the future suddenly brighter than we'd dared hope. The inheritance meant security for our practice, expansion possibilities we'd only dreamed of. The next morning, Father appeared at the clinic. He stood awkwardly in the waiting room, taking in the warm space we'd created. "Your mother told me about yesterday," he said finally, "and I've been thinking." I waited, hardly breathing. "The medical board position," he continued. "It's still yours if you want it, no conditions this time." "Thank you," I replied carefully, "but I need to know. What changed?" He looked around the clinic again, his expression softening. "You did, both of you. You proved me wrong about everything." That evening, Imogen and I sat on our porch, watching the sunset paint San Antonio's sky in brilliant colors. "Did today really happen?" she wondered aloud. "Which part?" I laughed. "The inheritance, my parents' acceptance, or the medical board position? All of it." She turned to face me, her green eyes bright. "We fought so hard, prepared for the worst, and then love won," I finished, pulling her close. "Just like that?" "Not just like that," I corrected. "We earned this, every bit of it." She kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. The future stretched before us, no longer a battlefield but a garden of possibilities. "So what's next?" she asked, settling back into my arms. "Everything," I replied, watching the stars emerge. Together. The night wrapped around us like a blanket, warm with the knowledge that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. We'd started with a convenient arrangement, and found an inconvenient truth, that love, real love, changes everything it touches. Our wedding day dawned clear and bright in San Antonio, the autumn air crisp with possibility. We'd chosen a small garden ceremony, intimate and true to who we were. "Ready?" Sarah asked, adjusting my simple white dress. She'd been my rock through everything, and now she stood beside me as my maid of honor. "More than ready," I replied, watching through the window as guests arrived. Mother was directing the florists with her usual precision, but now her energy supported us instead of constraining us. Imogen and I had decided to break tradition. We'd get ready together, walk down the aisle together. When she emerged from the bathroom in her cream-colored suit, my heart stopped. "You look stunning," she whispered, her green eyes bright with tears. "So do you." I reached for her hand, our fingers intertwining naturally. "Can you believe we started this with a fake engagement?" She laughed, the sound pure joy. "Best scheme I ever fell for." The ceremony was everything we'd hoped for. Our vows, written together late at night, spoke of transformation and truth, of finding love in unexpected places. Father, to everyone's surprise, had asked to officiate. "Love," he began, his voice carrying across the garden, "comes to us in many forms. Sometimes it teaches us more about ourselves than we were ready to learn." I saw Mother dabbing at her eyes in the front row, while Sarah beamed beside her. Our clinic staff filled several rows, along with patients who'd become friends. Even David had sent a congratulatory note, though he wisely chose not to attend. These two women, Father continued, taught our family about courage, about authenticity, about choosing love over convention. When we kissed as married partners, the applause felt like a victory cheer. We'd fought for this moment, earned it with tears and sacrifice and unwavering faith in each other. The reception was held at our clinic, transformed for the evening into a twinkling wonderland. It felt right to celebrate in the space we'd built together. "I have news," Imogen announced during our first dance. The expansion plans were approved. "We can open 3 more clinics across Texas." "Really?" I pulled back to see her face. "When did you find out?" "This morning. I wanted it to be a wedding gift." She smiled that smile that still made my heart race. "We're going to help so many more women." Later, as we cut the cake, I caught Mother deep in conversation with Imogen's aunt about fundraising possibilities. Father was discussing medical policy with our staff. Sarah was already planning the new clinic locations. "Look what we started," I murmured to Imogen as we swayed to the music. "Look what we finished," she corrected. "The pretending, the hiding, the doubt." "And look what we're beginning," I added, thinking of our expanding practice, our growing family of choice. As the evening wound down, we slipped away to the rooftop garden we'd built above the clinic. The San Antonio skyline sparkled around us, a city that had seen our struggles and our triumph. "I love you," Imogen said simply, pulling me close. No pretense, no conditions, no doubts. "I love you too." I touched her cheek, remembering that first meeting at the symposium. "Thank you for taking a chance on a crazy scheme. Thank you for making it real." We danced under the stars, 2 women who'd found each other through an elaborate deception and built something absolutely genuine. Our story wasn't conventional, but it was ours, every complicated, beautiful moment of it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, clinics to build, patients to help, boundaries to push. But tonight was for celebrating the journey that had brought us here, and the love that had transformed a convenient arrangement into an inconvenient, wonderful truth. "Ready for our next adventure?" Imogen asked as we prepared to leave. "With you?" I smiled, taking her hand. "Always." The night wrapped around us like a promise as we drove away, leaving behind the echoes of celebration and carrying forward the certainty that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead exactly where we're meant to be.